January 17th, 1942, North Atlantic. 48 degree, 23 degree bars. The steel hull groaned beneath the weight of the ocean. Inside U-94, the air tasted of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and something else. Something the 44 men aboard could not name but felt in their bones. It was the taste of being watched. Kapitan Leutnant Otto Ites stood in the cramped control room, his fingers tracing the edges of a decoded message from BDU, Befehlshaber der U-Boote, U-Boat Command. The coordinates were clear. The convoy route was confirmed. Intelligence had promised them a fat merchant fleet, lightly escorted, sailing predictably through grid square BE. It should have been a feast, but Ites felt no hunger, only a cold prickling at the base of his skull, the kind a deer feels 1 second before the rifle cracks. If you find these stories of courage and strategy inspiring, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us keep these historical legacies alive. Outside, the Atlantic heaved in gray mountains. The wind carried no answers. The waves knew nothing of radio frequencies, of Enigma rotors, of the men at Bletchley Park who had already read this very message 3 days before Ites ever saw it. They knew nothing of the patient, invisible net closing around U-94 and 17 other Wolfpack submarines, all converging on coordinates that had been chosen for them by an enemy they did not believe capable of such precision. Ites gave the order, dive to periscope depth. Proceed on heading 270. The crew moved with the efficiency of men who had survived 31 patrols. They did not yet know this would be their last. In the spring of 1941, the German U-boat arm was ascendant. The happy time, Die glückliche Zeit, had stretched from June 1940 through the winter of 1941, a period when the Atlantic Ocean became a graveyard for Allied merchant ships. The statistics were catastrophic. In 1940, alone, U-boats sank over 2.5 million tons of Allied shipping. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, refined the Wolfpack tactic, Rudeltaktik, whereby multiple submarines would coordinate attacks on a single convoy, overwhelming the escorts and slaughtering the cargo ships like wolves bringing down a wounded elk. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill would later write that the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war was the U-boat peril, not the Luftwaffe, not the panzer divisions, not even the threat of invasion. It was the silent, patient strangulation of Britain's supply lines, the slow death by hunger and fuel starvation that kept him awake at night. The U-boat men themselves were confident. They had reasons to be. Their vessels, though cramped and foul-smelling, were technologically advanced, capable of diving to 300 feet, equipped with acoustic torpedoes, and, most critically, protected by the Enigma cipher machine. The Enigma was Germany's pride, an electromechanical encryption device that rendered all naval communications theoretically unbreakable. Each machine had 3 rotors, later 4 for naval models, that could be set in billions of possible configurations. Every day at midnight, the settings changed. Even if the British captured an Enigma machine, without knowing the daily key settings, the intercepted messages would remain gibberish. German cryptographers assured the Kriegsmarine that breaking Enigma was mathematically impossible. The U-boat commanders believed them. They sent their position reports, their sighting signals, their rendezvous coordinates across the ether without fear. The ocean was vast, the enemy was blind, but the enemy was not blind. 300 miles away, in a Victorian mansion in the Buckinghamshire countryside, a different kind of war was being waged. Bletchley Park, known to the initiated only as Station X, was the nerve center of British signals intelligence. Here, in a cluster of wooden huts and repurposed estate buildings, 9,000 men and women worked in shifts around the clock. Mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, crossword obsessives, people who saw patterns where others saw only chaos. They were led by men like Alan Turing, whose theoretical work on computation had given birth to the bomb, an electromechanical device designed to test possible Enigma settings at inhuman speed. By mid-1941, the cryptanalysts in Hut 8, the naval section, had begun to crack the U-boat cipher with increasing regularity. The breakthrough had come in May 1941, when the British destroyer HMS Bulldog forced U-110 to the surface and captured her intact, along with her Enigma machine and current codebooks. The Germans believed U-110 had sunk with all hands. They did not change their cipher. For months afterward, Bletchley Park could read German naval traffic almost in real time. But the intelligence, codenamed Ultra, was a blade that had to be wielded with surgical care. If the British rerouted convoys too obviously, if they attacked U-boats with impossible precision, the Germans would realize their codes were compromised. They would change the cipher, and the window would slam shut. So, the British played a dangerous game. They allowed some convoys to be attacked. They let some U-boats slip away. But when the moment was right, when the prize was worth the risk, they set traps so subtle that the Germans would believe their misfortune was mere chance. Bad weather, aggressive escorts, unlucky timing, anything but betrayal by their own machines. January 1942 was one of those moments. Captain Lieutenant Ides surfaced U-94 at dusk. The sky was the color of a bruise. Around him, scattered across 50 square miles of ocean, 7 other U-boats rose like breaching whales, their conning towers black against the dying light. They had been summoned here by BDU, directed to form a patrol line across the expected path of convoy HX-171, a formation of 37 merchant ships carrying grain, steel, and aviation fuel from Halifax to Liverpool. The intelligence was solid. The convoy's route had been inferred from decoded British signals, cross-referenced with known sailing schedules. The trap was set. The wolves waited. What Ites did not know, what none of them knew, was that convoy HX-171 had been rerouted 2 days earlier. The new course took it 200 miles to the south. The orders had been transmitted in a cipher the Germans could not break, and the ships were now steaming safely beyond the Wolfpack's reach. But the British had done something more. They had positioned 4 escort groups, 23 warships in total, in a loose net around the very coordinates where the U-boats now gathered: destroyers, corvettes, a light cruiser, all equipped with Type 271 radar and ASDIC sonar, all waiting. At 21:34, U-94's radio operator picked up a transmission from U-653. Convoy sighted, bearing 180. Speed 9 knots. Ites felt the surge of adrenaline. This was it. He ordered the engines to full speed, racing south to intercept. Around him, the other boats did the same. They converged. But there was no convoy. Only warships. The first alarm came at 22:17. U-94's hydrophone operator, a pale young man named Lehman, pressed his headphones tighter and whispered a single word. Schraubengeräusche, propeller noise, multiple contacts, fast, closing. Ites ordered crash dive. The boat nosed down, seawater flooding the ballast tanks with a roar. They leveled off at 100 meters. Above them, the thrashing of destroyer screws grew louder, a grinding mechanical thunder that filled the hull. Then, the first depth charge detonated. The explosion was not a sound. It was a force, a fist of overpressure that seized the submarine and shook it like a dog shaking a rat. Light bulbs shattered. Men were thrown against bulkheads. The emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in red. A pipe ruptured, spraying steam. Ites gripped a stanchion and forced his voice steady. Silent running, rig for depth charge. The crew moved like ghosts, wrapping tools in rags, shutting down non-essential systems, breathing through their mouths to quiet the rasp of lungs. They became a tomb drifting through the dark. The British dropped 46 depth charges over the next 2 hours. Some exploded close enough to crack welds, to split seams, to send rivets pinging through the interior like bullets. Others detonated farther away, a distant crump that nonetheless set the hull ringing like a gong. With each blast, Ites calculated. He tried to guess the pattern: 3 charges in a triangle, then a single one offset to catch a fleeing submarine. But the pattern made no sense. The charges seemed to anticipate his evasions. When he turned east, the next salvo bloomed to the east. When he dove deeper, they came deeper. It was as if the destroyers above could see through the water, through his very thoughts. At 01:23, U-94 broke off the attack and crawled north at 2 knots, conserving battery, leaking oil. They escaped. 13 other U-boats were not so fortunate. 4 were sunk outright. 5 were so badly damaged they had to abort patrol and limp back to Lorient or Saint-Nazaire. The wolf pack achieved nothing. Not a single merchant ship was touched. In the operations room at U-boat headquarters in Paris, Admiral Dönitz studied the reports with a growing unease he did not allow his staff to see. 8 boats had reported enemy contact before they had even reached the convoy. The British destroyers had appeared as if conjured from thin air, precisely where the submarines were most concentrated. Dönitz was a careful man, a student of probability. He knew the Atlantic was vast, that chance encounters happened. But this was not chance. This was something else. He called for the communications officer. "Are we certain the Enigma is secure?" The officer, a pale lieutenant with wire-rimmed spectacles, nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, Herr Admiral. The cryptographic section has reviewed the procedures. The machine itself is unbreakable. Even if the British intercept every transmission, without the daily keys, the messages are meaningless. It is mathematically impossible." Dönitz nodded slowly. Mathematically impossible. But the British had done many impossible things already. He did not dismiss the possibility, but he did not act on it either. To suggest that Enigma was compromised would be to suggest that the entire German naval strategy was built on sand. It would be to admit that every U-boat at sea was a blind man stumbling through a room full of knives. He could not afford that doubt. So he filed the anomaly under aggressive escort tactics and improved British radar, and he sent his boats back into the Atlantic. The men in the boats were less easily reassured. Aboard U-94, the whispers began during the long, tense voyage back to France. Lehman, the hydrophone operator, spoke first, his voice low and hoarse in the red-lit gloom. They knew where we were, before we transmitted, before we surfaced. They were waiting. The others said nothing, but their silence was agreement. Eitz listened and said nothing either. He was not a superstitious man. He did not believe in curses or jinxes, but he believed in patterns, and the pattern here was unmistakable. The British had known. When U-94 docked at Lorient on February 3rd, Eitz filed his patrol report. He wrote the facts plainly. Enemy contact prior to convoy interception, unusually precise depth charge attacks, no visual or radar contact before the ambush. He did not speculate. But in the officers' mess that night, over watery ersatz coffee and black bread, he heard the same doubts repeated by other captains. U-201, U-82, U-432. All had experienced similar encounters, destroyers appearing without warning, depth charges landing with uncanny accuracy, convoys vanishing from their predicted routes. One commander, pale and sleepless, muttered over his cup, "It's as if they read our signals." The room went quiet. Someone laughed nervously, but no one dismissed the idea. The truth, locked away in the Hut 8 filing cabinets at Bletchley Park, was both simpler and more terrible than the U-boat men imagined. The British were indeed reading their signals. Not every message, not in real time, but enough. Enough to map the patrol lines, to predict the ambush points, to redirect convoys into safe corridors and warships into kill zones. The Enigma machine, Germany's unbreakable cipher, had become a weapon turned against its users. Every coordinate transmitted, every sighting report, every rendezvous order was a thread in a net the Germans themselves were weaving. But the British could not reveal the source. If a U-boat was sunk, the Admiralty concocted cover stories. A merchant ship had spotted the periscope. A patrol plane had sighted the oil slick. The destroyer had stumbled upon the submarine by chance. Sometimes they even staged fake reconnaissance flights, sending aircraft over empty ocean just so German intelligence would have an innocent explanation for how the British discovered a submarine's location. The deception was elaborate, multi-layered, maintained at enormous cost. Ships that could have been saved were allowed to sail into danger. U-boats that could have been destroyed were allowed to escape, all to preserve the secret, and the secret held. For 3 more years, with periodic blackouts when the Germans upgraded their cipher or changed procedures, Ultra gave the Allies a decisive edge in the Atlantic. By 1943, the U-boat war was effectively lost. Dönitz would later calculate that 785 of his 1,162 U-boats were sunk during the war, a casualty rate of 75%. Over 30,000 German submariners went to sea. 28,000 never returned. They died in the dark, in the cold, crushed by pressure, or drowned in flooded compartments, and many of them died wondering how the enemy always seemed to know where they were. Otto Eitz survived the war. U-94 was sunk in August 1942 by a British bomber, but Eitz had been reassigned to a training command 3 months earlier. In 1947, during the post-war interrogations, British intelligence officers showed him decrypted copies of his own patrol reports, transmitted in Enigma and read at Bletchley Park within hours. Eitz stared at the documents for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "We never had a chance, did we?" The interrogator, a polite young man from Cambridge, said nothing. The answer was already on the table. There is a photograph taken in June 1945 in the Naval Archives at Wilhelmshaven. It shows a row of Enigma machines, still in their wooden cases, lined up on a dock awaiting destruction. The rotors have been removed. The wiring is exposed. They look fragile now, almost pathetic. Boxes of gears and springs that once seemed to hold the future. In the background, partially visible, is the conning tower of a scuttled U-boat, half submerged, its hull number painted over. The image is grainy, indistinct, but it captures something essential about the nature of that war. Not the battles fought with torpedoes and depth charges, but the hidden war fought with mathematics and secrets, with keystrokes and cipher wheels, where victory was measured not in territory gained, but in information concealed. The men who died in U-94 and boats like her believed they were fighting a war of steel and courage. They were. But they were also fighting a war they could not see, against an enemy who had turned their own voices into traps. Every transmission they made, every confident report of position and readiness, was a confession intercepted and filed away in a country manor in Buckinghamshire. They spoke, and the enemy listened, and the ocean swallowed them, and only after the war did the survivors learn how completely they had been betrayed by the machines they trusted. Enigma was not the only cipher broken during the war. The Americans cracked the Japanese naval codes. The Soviets penetrated German army communications. The Germans themselves broke several Allied ciphers, though none as strategically vital as Enigma. But Ultra stands apart because of the scale of the deception required to protect it, and because of what it revealed about modern warfare. The Industrial Revolution had given nations the means to produce weapons of unprecedented lethality. The Second World War proved that the information revolution, still in its infancy, still mechanical, still reliant on human ingenuity more than computing power, could be just as decisive. A submarine could be the most advanced piece of technology afloat, crewed by brave and skillful men, armed with torpedoes that could split a freighter in half. And it could still be rendered helpless by a handful of mathematicians who never saw the ocean. This is the paradox that haunted the U-boat commanders after the war. They had fought with honor by the laws of naval warfare as they understood them. They had endured conditions of almost unimaginable hardship, months submerged in a steel tube 50 meters long and 6 meters wide, breathing air fouled by diesel fumes and unwashed bodies, eating moldy bread and canned meat, sleeping in shifts in bunks still warm from the previous occupant, knowing that at any moment a depth charge could crack the hull, and the Atlantic would flood in at lethal pressure, and there would be no escape, no survival, only the long fall into darkness and cold. They had done all this, and they had believed that their courage and their technology would be enough. It was not. And the cruelest part was that they never knew why. Admiral Dönitz himself never fully accepted the truth. Even after the war, even after being shown the decrypted messages, he insisted that the British success was due primarily to advances in radar and direction finding, not to cryptanalysis. Perhaps he could not bear the alternative, that his entire strategy, his beloved wolf packs, his meticulously planned operations had been transparent to the enemy from the start, that every order he issued from his headquarters in Paris or Berlin was read in England before his own U-boats received it, that his voice, transmitted through the Enigma machine he trusted absolutely, had become an instrument of his men's destruction. There is a recording of Dönitz made during the Nuremberg trials where he discusses the U-boat campaign. His voice is steady, almost clinical. He recites statistics, tonnage sunk, submarines lost, crew survival rates. He speaks of tactical innovations, of the acoustic torpedo, of the snorkel device that allowed submarines to run their diesels while submerged. He does not speak of Enigma. When the prosecutor presses him on the sudden collapse of U-boat effectiveness in mid-1943, Dönitz attributes it to increased Allied air cover and the introduction of escort carriers. The prosecutor does not contradict him. The ultra-secret was still classified. Dönitz went to his grave in 1980, believing or pretending to believe that the war in the Atlantic had been lost by inches, by incremental improvements in the enemy's technology and tactics. He never acknowledged the possibility that it had been lost before it began, the moment the first Enigma rotors started turning, and the patient listeners at Bletchley Park started writing down the secrets he thought were safe. In the end, the symbol that defined the Atlantic War was not a weapon. It was a machine, small, mechanical, unremarkable to look at. A wooden box containing rotors, wiring, a keyboard, and a lamp board. It weighed 26 pounds. It could be carried by one man, and it destroyed an entire fleet. The men in the U-boats carried other things too. Photographs of wives and children kept in waterproof pouches. Letters from home, read and reread until the paper grew soft and fragile. Lucky charms, coins, medallions, carved wooden figures. These objects were tangible, personal, imbued with meaning by the hands that held them. But the Enigma machine was impersonal. It cared nothing for the men who used it. It encrypted their words with mechanical indifference, and it betrayed those words with the same indifference. It was a tool, and like all tools, it was only as secure as the system that used it. The Germans built that system on the assumption of mathematical invincibility. The British dismantled it with patience, genius, and an industrial capacity for secret keeping that the Germans never matched. And so, the U-boats went to sea, one after another, through 1942 and 1943 and 1944, and they transmitted their positions and their sightings, and the Enigma machines clicked and whirred and encrypted the messages, and in England the bombs clicked and whirred and decrypted them, and the convoys were rerouted, and the destroyers moved into position, and the depth charges fell, and the submarines sank, and the men inside them drowned, and the secret held. On the night of August 28, 1942, U-94 was caught on the surface by a Wellington bomber of RAF Coastal Command. The aircraft attacked out of the darkness, guided by radar the submarine crew never saw. The first bomb struck the stern, rupturing the fuel tanks. The second hit amidships, penetrating the pressure hull. U-94 sank in 90 seconds. There were no survivors. The bomber crew reported the kill. Bletchley Park logged the report and cross-referenced it with the decoded Enigma traffic from U-94's last transmission, sent 6 hours earlier. The submarine had reported its position, its fuel status, its patrol sector. The information had been processed, analyzed, and passed to Coastal Command, which had dispatched the Wellington to the coordinates. The operation was textbook ultra, precise, lethal, invisible. The official record attributed the sinking to routine air patrol. The Germans never suspected otherwise. Years later, in the archives at Freiburg, a researcher found Otto Eitz's final letter to his wife, written 2 days before his reassignment and mailed from Lorient. The letter is brief, matter-of-fact, concerned mostly with mundane details. A pair of boots he wanted her to send, a question about their son's schooling, but in the last paragraph he wrote, "The sea has changed. It no longer feels vast. It feels watched." The researcher noted the sentence in her dissertation on U-boat morale. She did not know about Ultra. The files were still classified. History remembers the Atlantic War in gross terms. Ships sunk, tonnage lost, strategic outcomes. The turning point in May 1943, when U-boat losses exceeded new constructions and Dönitz temporarily withdrew his fleet from the North Atlantic. The final victory? The slow strangulation of Germany's war economy as the convoys sailed through unmolested and the raw materials of American industry flooded into Britain and Russia. These are the facts, and they are true, but they do not capture the texture of the experience. The creeping dread aboard U-94 as the depth charges fell closer, the prickling certainty that something was wrong, that the ocean itself had turned hostile, that the enemy knew too much. That feeling, that intuition, was correct, but it was also useless. Knowing that you are watched does not help if you do not know how or by whom, or what to do about it. And so, the U-boat men did what soldiers have always done. They followed orders. They trusted their superiors. They believed in their equipment. They went back to sea. There is a monument in Miltenort near Kiel overlooking the Baltic. It is a simple stone column inscribed with the names of the 30,000 German submariners who died in the war. The names are listed alphabetically without rank or distinction. A democracy of the dead. Tourists visit occasionally. They take photographs. They read a few names aloud, stumbling over the unfamiliar syllables. Then they leave. The monument does not explain how the men died, or why. It does not mention Enigma or Bletchley Park, or the patient cryptanalysts who read the signals and wrote the orders that sent the destroyers and the bombers to the coordinates where the submarines would be. It is silent on the machinery of betrayal. It remembers only the loss, but the loss is enough. 30,000 men, most of them younger than 25, drowned in steel coffins at the bottom of the Atlantic. They died believing they were fighting a fair fight, a contest of skill and courage between equals. They were not. The fight was rigged from the beginning, and they never knew. That ignorance does not diminish their bravery, but it does reframe it. They were not tragic heroes undone by fate. They were pieces in a game played at a level they could not perceive, sacrificed by moves they could not counter, defeated by an enemy who had already read the ending before the opening gambit was played. In 1974, the British government began the gradual declassification of the ultra-secret. The first official history, written by F.H. Hinsley, appeared in 1979. It was measured, academic, dense with footnotes and caveats. But the core revelation was stark. The Allies had broken Enigma, and the intelligence gained had shortened the war by years and saved countless lives. The German reaction was muted. Some veterans expressed disbelief, others, anger. A few, like Eitz in his 1947 interrogation, simply acknowledged the truth with weary resignation. The war had been over for 30 years. The dead were still dead. Knowing how they died changed nothing for them, and little for the survivors, but it changed history. The story of the Atlantic War was rewritten. The emphasis shifted from tactics and technology to intelligence and deception. Scholars began to appreciate the scale of the Allied achievement, not just the cryptanalysis itself, but the operational security, the cover stories, the elaborate theater constructed to prevent the Germans from realizing their cipher was compromised. It was, in its way, the first modern intelligence war, fought not with spies and assassins, but with mathematicians and machines, and its lessons shaped the Cold War and every conflict since. The notion that information could be a weapon, that knowledge could kill as surely as bullets, became foundational to military strategy. Enigma proved it, and yet, for all the analysis and scholarship, the human dimension remains elusive. What did it feel like to be Otto Eitz aboard U-94, listening to the depth charges creep closer, suspecting but not knowing that his every move had been anticipated? What did it feel like to surface at night and transmit a position report, confident in the security of the Enigma machine, unaware that in England a young woman at a typewriter was already transcribing his words, and that, within the hour, those words would be analyzed, plotted on a map, and converted into an order that would send destroyers racing toward his coordinates? There are no recordings of those moments, no journals that capture the precise texture of the dread. The men who experienced it are gone, but the traces remain. In the patrol reports, written in terse military language, there are hints. Enemy contact without prior warning. Depth charge pattern unusually accurate. Abort patrol due to persistent enemy presence. These are bureaucratic phrases, drained of emotion, but read correctly, they are whispers from the grave. They are the voices of men who sensed the trap but could not see it, who knew they were hunted but did not know how, who died in confusion and darkness, betrayed by the machines they trusted. The Atlantic is vast and indifferent. The wrecks of the U-boats lie scattered across its floor, rusting slowly in the cold and dark. Some have been located by researchers using sonar and submersibles. Others remain lost, their final positions marked only in the decoded Enigma logs at Bletchley Park. Inside those wrecks, if the pressure did not crush them entirely, are the remains of the crews. Bones now, fabric rotted away, metal corroded, the Enigma machines perhaps still intact, Salt water cannot erase the mechanical precision of their rotors, though it can freeze them in place, a final encryption that will never be decoded. There is a photograph, taken by a deep-sea expedition in 1998, of the interior of Usin 352, sunk off the coast of North Carolina. The camera's light pierces the darkness, illuminating a control room frozen in time. The valves are still set to diving configuration. A coffee mug, ceramic, miraculously unbroken, rests on a shelf. And in the corner, partially obscured by silt, is the wooden case of an Enigma machine. The expedition did not recover it. International maritime law protects war graves. The machine remains there still, 40 meters down, encased in a tomb of steel and silence, a monument to the faith the crew placed in it, and to the failure of that faith. So, we return to the beginning. To U-94, January 1942, the moment before the trap closed. To Capitan Lieutenant Itis standing in the control room, feeling the cold prickling at the base of his skull, the intuition that something was wrong. He could not have known, in that moment, that his position report, transmitted just 3 hours earlier, had already been decrypted at Bletchley Park. He could not have known that the convoy he sought did not exist, that it had been rerouted based on intelligence derived from his own transmissions and those of his fellow commanders. He could not have known that the destroyers waiting above him had been vectored into position with the same intelligence, that every move he made had been predicted and countered before he made it. All he knew was the feeling, the watched feeling, the sense that the ocean, once a shield, had become a window, and he was right. But being right did not save him, or his crew, or the 30,000 others who followed them into the dark. This is the legacy of Enigma. Not the machine itself, which was ingenious but not infallible. Not the codebreakers, who were brilliant but not omnipotent. The legacy is the understanding that, in modern war, the most dangerous enemy is not the one you can see, but the one who can see you. The one who reads your signals, anticipates your movements, and prepares the trap while you are still planning the attack. The one who turns your own voice into a weapon against you. The U-boat men died brave deaths. But they died for a lie. The lie that their communications were secure. The lie that their courage and skill would be enough. The lie that they were fighting an enemy who could be outmaneuvered and outfought, when in truth they were fighting an enemy who had already won, who had cracked the cipher and read the ending, and was simply waiting for them to arrive at the coordinates where the destroyers were already positioned, where the depth charges were already fused and loaded, where the sea would close over them and the war would go on without them, and their names would be carved on a stone column overlooking the Baltic, and decades later, a researcher would find a letter and read a sentence. The sea has changed. It no longer feels vast. It feels watched. And understand, finally, that the man who wrote those words had known. He had known, and it had not mattered. The machinery was already in motion. The trap was already set. The ocean was already listening, and the secret held. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this historical deep dive, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which historical figure we should cover next.